Clemson likes to be known for their outstanding culture in their football program. Now, with 3 players being arrested this year and the season hasn't even started yet, is it time to start questioning that culture?
You are Locked On Clemson, your daily podcast on the Clemson Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Clemson podcast. I'm your host, John Bivens. You can follow us over on Twitter at I am John Bivens. We are a credentialed media member for the Clemson Tigers with football, basketball, and baseball. Thanks so much for making Locked On Clemson your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast at and over on YouTube. We are a part of the amazing Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Locked On Clemson, your first listen. Make sure your second listen is one of the other 200 shows that is provided by Locked On Podcast Network. We listen to the Locked On ACC show daily, as well as Locked On Padres. We're a big San Diego Padre fan in the baseball world, Major League Baseball. Whatever your team is, find it your team every day with a part of Locked On Podcast Network. But here on the Locked On Clemson, you're getting 3 things. You're getting Locked On, or you're getting all sports, all passion, and all of the time, bringing you everything you need to know regarding the Clemson Tigers athletics. Today is Wednesday, July 24th. We've got a great episode for you, talking about some trouble off the field. We're Locked In Clemson, talking about locked up Clemson Tigers. See the play on words there. But we're also going to talk about the dirt raid if it's finally time for that. We're going to wrap up the episode talking about how possibly Clemson could shake up the college football world. We are grateful for Gametime. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. When it comes to Clemson football, a lot of words come into mind, right? Culture, grit, all in, Dabo Swinney. There's a lot of themes, a lot of personality, a lot of words coming to mind when you think of college football or when you think of Clemson Tigers football. And one of those is culture. Dabo Swinney and the whole environment at Clemson football, culture is huge. Talking about the great men, how they're not just growing great football players, but they're helping grow. They're helping young men become great men on and off the field. Well, Clemson in 2024 is seeing a trend that they haven't seen since 2012, and that is players are getting arrested. So far, with this past Sunday, we found out that a player for Clemson football was arrested. Caden Story was arrested on Sunday with a misdemeanor charge of possession of marijuana. According to Pickens County Public Records, he had less than an ounce of marijuana. So it wasn't a huge thing, but he was arrested for these drug charges. Caden's arrest marks the 3rd arrest this year in 2024 by an active Clemson football player. Early on this year, DeMonte Capehart, a defensive tackle, had a felony charge with weapons and trafficking charges, or felon charge right there. That was dismissed later on because he entered some programs. Noble Johnson got into a very high-speed wreck, caused very serious injuries to 3 other people, had a misdemeanor charge of reckless driving. Those 3 players, active Clemson players, have been arrested this year, 2024, not a 12-month year, but this year, 2024, 3 players already. That's the most in a single year since 2012. In 2012, if you don't remember, there was at least 5 players that were arrested in that 1 year. 5 players from Clemson football were arrested. And honestly, that year, that kind of marked a period where there was a lot of off-field drama happening. There was a lot of people getting arrested. There was a lot of trouble. There was a lot of people kind of not behaving how Clemson football behaves. And that was early on in Dabo Swinney's era. He took over 2010. And honestly, those first couple of years, he saw a lot. In 2011, he had a player get arrested. 2011, he had 3 Clemson players get arrested. Xavier Brewer, Rashad Breeland, and Joe Craig were all arrested in connection with a fight that broke out in a dorm room. 2 were charged with disorderly conduct, and 1 was charged with 3rd-degree assault and battery. Then in 2012, 5 more players were arrested. Carlton Lewis was arrested, charged with public disorder conduct. Defensive back Jared Williams was arrested with marijuana. Also in 2012, you had Chad Kelly, who he was removed from the team with his instances. He was kicked off for I think he got in a fight with a bar and was kicked off there. You also had another players in 2012. You had Chad Kelly was 2014. But in 2012, you also had Jerome Maybank, who was charged with drug-related offenses. Sammy Watkins, Clemson great wide receiver, arrested for a controlled substance and marijuana charge. Then you also we talked about Carton Lewis. We talked about Gerard Williams. There was multiple players in 2012. So that's a total of 7 to 8 players at least in less than the 2 calendar years that were arrested for Clemson football. After those arrests, it felt like Clemson kind of got back in. That feels like that marked the point where Dabo Swinney really started talking about culture. He put an emphasis on, we're not just going to be a good football team. We're not just going to be good on the field. We're going to be great off the field. We're going to develop these young men and how to be young men. Since then, we saw nowhere near as many arrests, but there still were some. Like we mentioned, 2014, they had 3 players arrested then. Chad Kelly, like we mentioned. You also had Mackenzie Alexander and Jadar Johnson got arrested with some possessions of marijuana. 2015 had some people get arrested as well. In 2015, you had Deion Kane for failing a drug test. You had a kicker, Amon Lackett, for a cocaine possession and a DUI. You also had, there was more in 2015, you also had Jaron Kearse, who was assaulted for arrested for a small amount of marijuana. So 2015 had some people. It didn't stop there, though. It was slowed down, but it still didn't completely stop. There was some more in 2016. Deion Kane and Amon Lackett again were arrested for drug-related charges. Or Lackett, it's depending on the sources, 2015 or 2016. And then in 2018, you had Cornell Powell, who was arrested for marijuana. C.J. Fuller and Jadar Johnson were arrested in 2018 on drug charges and armed robbery, possession of a weapon in the middle of a crime. And nothing in 2019, but then 2020, you had Xavier Kelly for drug charges and driving with a suspended license. 2021, you had Fred Davis II arrested for reckless driving after a crash. And then we talked about the 3 that has happened in 2024. So Clemson focuses on culture, but with the big hit that happened in early to the 2010s, everything that happened there with the off-field drama, the off-field charges, it kind of slowed down. But now in 2024, with 3 players already being arrested, and granted, some of them were small, like he had less than an ounce of marijuana, but 3 different players have now been arrested. Is it time to start questioning that culture? I'm a big Dabo Swinney fan. I'm a huge hit fan. I think he's a great guy, but you got to follow the trend. And if the trend right now is players are getting arrested for different things, 2 different things for or 1 drug charge, 1 felonies, weapons, and 1 reckless driving. Now, granted, none of those players that were arrested were high profile players. Caden Story is a 3rd-string left defensive tackle. Cape Hart is also he's supposed to start defensive tackle this year, but he hasn't started yet. Noble he wasn't on the roster. I think he got a total of like 39 snaps last year. So none of these players are like massive players or people that are high profiles, but they still active players. In the middle of this time, in the middle of this question mark, you got to ask, is Clemson culture is what they're one of their founding blocks? Is it starting to drip off a little bit, or is this just a blink? If this is just a one-time weird coincidence where 3 things have happened, or is it time to start questioning this culture? 3 different players getting arrested. I really don't want a repeat of 2011, 2012. I would love for that not to be the case, but you never know. It could be following that way. I'm hoping Dabo can get it under control. I'm hoping Dabo can stop that. But with the breaking news of Caden Story, is this just going to be another repeat of the early 2010s? Is the culture dipping off? Is it drawing back from what it was? Or is Dabo going to turn this around and get the culture back to where it is? Something to monitor, something to keep our eyes on. But it's interesting to think about, interesting to talk about. Is the culture still there for Clemson Tigers? In a moment, we're going to continue this conversation, but we're going to move it on. Last year, when Garrett Riley came in, he coined the term dirt raid. This year, it might be time for the dirt raid to officially kick off. We'll talk about that more right after this break. MLB is in full swing. Very little is better than a game day at Clemson University, but MLB games are a very close second. I love going to different ballparks, the vibe, the feel, the fans in the stadium, and my go-to place for tickets is Gametime app. Gametime is an authorized ticket seller for all MLB games, and they're the easiest place to go to for all your ticket needs. Whether it's in advance or the day of, prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seats, and the lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Braves, they're in a little slump right now, got a bunch of injuries going on. You can never count them out. I'm a huge Padres fan, like I mentioned. They're making a push, trying to strive for that last wild card spot. No matter your team, Gametime is the place for all your tickets for MLB games. Some of my favorite things about Gametime is I love the fact that when you're buying last-minute tickets, you get up to 60% off your seat. I also love the fact that almost every single ticket you buy, you can click on the seat before you buy them and view a panoramic view, so you're going to know exactly what you're going to be seeing and where you're going to be near during the game. I love that. They're so convenient. They make buying tickets easier. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app now today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Clemson podcast. It is finally time for us to see the dirt raid. The term dirt raid was coined by Garrett Riley, Clemson's offensive coordinator, when he had a conversation with Dabo Swinney. That happened when Dabo Swinney first brought him on. He had a desire to avoid the air raid. If you haven't heard the term air raid before, what that means is it's an offense that solely passes the ball. Very little implementation of the running game. Dabo Swinney told Garrett Riley, he was like, hey, I don't want the air raid. And Garrett Riley, he was known for running that. When he was at TCU under Sonny Dykes, he ran a strictly air raid offense. He passed the ball so much. But Garrett Riley turned to Dabo and he's like, you know what? We're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to be the dirt raid. Talking about how he's going to highlight a balanced approach that's going to be strong running with a balance of passing in that. Last year, we didn't see that. In order for the dirt raid to happen, we kind of talked about this a little bit yesterday, but in order for the dirt raid to happen, your running game has to be good. We talked about the cycle. Running game's good, so passing game opens. Running game's good, so passing game opens, which allows your running game, right? A great cycle. The opposite can be true if it's bad. A bad passing game, they can load the box and cause you not being able to run it. If you can't run it, the pass game's not going to be open either. So, right, it's either a positive or it's a negative cycle, one of the two. Well, this year, I think it is finally time for the dirt raid to happen. And here's why. Here's why I think it is. Clemson's offensive coordinator, Garrett Riley, he's talked about how this year there's going to be a significant increase and a significant jump in year 2. And he blames he points to a bunch of different areas on why the dirt raid's ready. One, he said there's better chemistry. He talked about Cade Klubnik and talked about how there's so much better chemistry between Cade and his offensive weapons and his offensive players. He talked about how there's a better understanding between the players on truly what it means for the dirt raid. Talking about how Klubnik has grasped the offenses. Now that they've had a full year of him at the quarterback, a full year of Garrett Riley as the coordinator, they've had time to truly understand what Garrett Riley's trying to make this offense. And so there's better understanding. He's talked about there's a healthier squad. Last year, we had some key injuries. Antonio Williams was gone. Cole Turners were gone. Offensive line were hurt a lot. Now those are back. They're all healthy, plus the addition of more weapons, more players. So that's encouraging. The experience. The offensive line and other core leaders have so much more experience. We talk about Blake Wright is one of the leaders of this offensive line. He's a senior. He's going to be massive. He's got experience. Cade Klubnik's got another full year of experience under his belt. Garrett Riley has experience being at Clemson, knowing what to expect. There's more experience around the players. Phil Moffa's a senior. Our starting RB1, sole RB1, is now a senior with experience. There's experience surrounding that allows the dirt raid to open up. And it also, there's going to be a better balanced attack. Garrett Riley talked about how this year, instead of having to rely only on the ground game or only on the pass game, both have seen improvements. The ground game has increased, the pass game has increased, which allows both of them to increase even more. So the dirt raid's going to open up because there is this balance of pack. And the last part is adaptability. Riley has pushed and pushed and pushed about the offense being able to be adaptable, focusing on the strengths of available personnel, having so much talent on the sidelines that tired never comes into play. That being able to switch around different positions or being able to switch around different schemes and having different players come in and give you a couple snaps relief, that's there. This adaptability to change, adaptability for other players to fit in the spots, that's huge. He also talked about a strategy for this. Like we said, he talked about the balance approach, how air raid has got to be strong for the ground game to work. And so it's going to be a dirt raid where you're running the ball, but you're passing the ball strong. He talked about the running game is important because in order for have a dirt raid, you've got to be able to run the ball. And that creates possibilities to run the clock, to be able to win the championships by taking control of the gameplay. But he walked in other things like versatile play calling, talking about how it's not going to be a set format, a set formation. No, he's going to switch it up. There's going to be a long, varying range of different play calls and systems and formats. Talked about zone and GAT schemes, how Coach Matt Luke is coming in and revamping this offensive line, giving new schemes for that offensive line to make holes for Phil Maffa and our running backs to break through and get some yards. And he talks about how teams have shown with offensive lines and with the skill set that this offense has, teams that have similar styles and similar talent have had huge successes in running the ball, especially at Clemson. So if he's able to approach these, if he's able to hit these, that's what's going to be successful. This year is going to be the year of the dirt raid for Clemson. All signs are pointing there. Not only that, Garrett Riley then talked about all that, but he also said they've got some key players that are being able to, that are coming in and keeping this dirt raid a possibility. Obviously, Cade Klubnik, the mobile quarterback, able to get off his feet, able to kind of run, throw on the run, or even run the ball, taking a little bit of the pressure off of Phil Maffa. He's there. Again, Phil Maffa, that experienced, so strong running back. He's now going to be in the he will be in the NFL one day, but he's now the primary running back with Will Shipley with the Eagles now. Antonio Williams is coming back. He's healthy. He's been impressive this offseason. Cole Turner is healthy, ready to contribute. Tristan Lee he's emerging as a leader. He is rising to the ranks of that offensive line, becoming a strong leader of that core. Blake Miller, like we talked about, he is the leader of that offensive line. And then Jake Brenningsizel, he's a huge tight end that can block, that can run, that can receive. So his versatility is huge as well. Those players, plus the additions of freshmen TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco, other receivers like Adam Randall, Tyler Brown, because of all the weapons, because of these key players, the dirt raid's going to be there. One thing he did talk about was challenges and improvements. What are some areas from last year that would have to change in order for this year? Number one, he said last year obviously was a very hard year. There was a lack of chemistry. There was a lot of turnovers. There was a lot of problems that caused that dirt raid not to work. He talked about red zone issues. Last year, Clemson was 118th in the red zone offense. Got to improve there. And he's confident it will this year. Talked about experience. Last year, we did have a lot of younger players, and the players with experience weren't those really game maker players. They weren't those really highlight players. They were more of kind of bridge gap players. Talked about health. Last year, the injury bug definitely hit Clemson. Hopefully that's going to stay away. And then like we talked about, understanding and adaptability are huge. Being able to understand what he wants to do, understand what dirt raid means, understand what players' roles are there, and then having that freedom to adapt, or that freedom to provide some relief, to adapt the offense to strengths and advantages based on the players that are on the field and players that can be on the field. So with all that, it's finally time. Get excited. The dirt raid is happening. It is about finally time for the Clemson University, that dirt raid that Dabo Swinney, Garrett Riley told the whole nation about, that never showed up last year. This year it's going to. The running game's going to be there, which is going to open the passing game. As long as Cade can hit the passes, this year's offense is going to be immaculate. Get ready for the dirt raid. It's happening. Get ready to be excited. With all that being said, there's more to be excited about. 24/7 Sports put out a list of games that will shake up the college football world. We'll talk about that and more when we come back in just a second. Clemson Tigers have the chance to completely shake up the college football world this year. They have the chance to completely, in the words of 24/7, turn the game upside down, turn the world upside down, turn college football upside down when it comes to results. And here's why. They put out a list of the 10 best games, the 10 best outcomes that could completely flip college football upside down. We'll quickly go through those. I'll give you a hint. Clemson's at number 1, fitting. So the 10 things that can happen this year that would completely shake up college football, according to 24/7 Sports. Number 10 was Colorado to win 9 games. All the hype with Prime, all the hype of, this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to be. Prime coming in with all the transfers, kicking players out, taking scholarships, and then to have a bust year. If he turns around and has a great, successful year, wins 9 games, that'd be a huge change, showing how the new transfer portal, fully relying on the transfer, can really work. Number 2 is USF upends Miami in Tampa. One of the preseason Group 5 programs in the American Conference is USF. They got a crazy offense. Their offense is wild. And in week 4, they play Miami in Tampa Bay. If Miami loses that game, all the doubt for the ACC just continues to skyrocket. Right now, Miami is considered the 3rd best team in the ACC in football. Possibly higher, depending on who you ask. If they lose to USF, a Group of 5 program in Tampa Bay, that hurts. That would completely shake it up. Number 8, another ACC. There's a lot of ACC on this list. Number 8 is if NC State wins the ACC. Could you imagine? Florida State, no. Miami, no. Clemson, no. If Dave Doran leads the NC State, grabs a top 4 seed in the college football playoffs and win the ACC, that would change everything. It would. 24/7 brought this up, and it's a great point. It would be like TCU from a couple years ago, that team that shocked the world. That would shake it completely, and now it would even further cement the ACC not having that dominant school. Next one, Notre Dame at USC. That game is most likely going to determine a postseason or going to determine a playoff spot. Various predictions and people that are going through predicting the playoffs tournament are putting Notre Dame and USC. Their matchup late on in the year is going to be a huge run for a huge determining factor for who gets a playoff spot. So that's going to be a big game. Alabama and Wisconsin, they said if Wisconsin upsets Alabama in week 3, changes everything. Nick Saban, not there anymore. That would be crazy. That would be wild. So they said that would shake it up. Number 5, if Kansas wins the Big 12, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Utah, those seem to be like the bigger schools, the more favorites in the Big 12. Kansas winning the Big 12 would kind of be that NC State coming up, winning the ACC, but even on a higher level. Number 4, an unbeaten team left out of the college football playoffs. This one is crazy. Last year, FSU got left out of the playoffs after going undefeated ACC champions. Now the football playoffs is 12 teams. Can you imagine if an undefeated team is left out of the playoffs? Obviously, if you're a Power 4 conference, you're going to make the playoffs. One, you're going to win the ACC champion, or you're going to win their conference champion. But what about the Group of 5? Let's say Liberty. Liberty is one of the teams that's favored to be that solid Group of 5 in spot for the playoffs. What if Liberty goes undefeated and doesn't make the playoffs? That would be wild. It would completely shake up everything. Number 3, Ohio State sputters in Big Ten debut. Really, the first 4 weeks, Ohio State's got a cruise, but then they travel to Michigan State in week 5. What happens if they lose that? What happens if this one of the most hyped teams, overhyped team every single year? What happens if they go through and just drop an egg? Be massive, right? And then Billy Napier with Florida. What if he goes a 5-game gauntlet unbeaten? Florida has the toughest schedule in college football. They've got a massive schedule. They go Miami, then they play Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Texas, and Kentucky, all in a row, right? Crazy time. Then they play Georgia right after that. But what happens if they go undefeated in those 5 games? Would be massive. So those are the majority ones, but here's the one we really want to talk about. What happens and how much does it change the world if Clemson goes in and upsets Georgia in week 1? I know as Clemson fans were like, oh, that's going to happen. Yeah, that's why are we even talking about this? Of course it's going to happen. Let's really think about this. Georgia is right now considered the best team in college football, hands down, no doubt. Clemson is considered one of the teams that has so many question marks. You don't know if it's a real university at this point, right? Like there's question marks at every turn. If Clemson wins this game, now you have Georgia, who's going into a tough SEC, starting off with a loss. Changing up, or are they really that program? Are they really still this back-to-back champion that they were? Are they still this dominant program that they are? They didn't make the college football playoff last year, but they dominated an injured FSU squad in a bowl game. That would be wild for them. If Clemson goes in, and here's the biggest thing that can shake up the college football world if Clemson wins. If Clemson wins this game, Dabo Swinney proves all haters wrong. He proves that the transfer portal is not as important as people are making it out to be if you can recruit. He proves that Clemson is still Clemson and the fall off isn't existent. And he proves that Clemson's back. There's big lines here for Clemson. The opposite's true. Like if it's a close game and Clemson loses by 2 possessions or less, that's what you expect. Clemson still has a great season, still could happen. Georgia is the team they expected to be. If it's a blowout, if Georgia comes out and just blows out Clemson, Dabo's in a tough spot because now Dabo's like, we can't go. The question mark's going to be Dabo can't compete with the big squads anymore. Transfers are because no transfers. He didn't have the help he needed, didn't have the skill he needed. There is so much at stake here. This game is massive. That's why it was rated one of the most important games on another list that we dissected earlier on this offseason. This game has so much potential to completely change how people view the college football. It could be Clemson, the rise back of Clemson after a little dip a couple years back to where they should be. The rise back of Dabo, proving all his haters wrong. The rise back of you not needing the transfer portal. It could be the continued fall of Clemson, having to fight with their back against the wall after a week 1 loss. This could be crazy. I do want to remind you this. The last time Clemson and Georgia played was in the opener. Clemson lost 10-3. The only touchdown was a pick 6 by Georgia. That was the least amount of points they scored and the lowest margin of victory they scored that entire year, and that's the year Georgia won the national championship. So Clemson stuck in there before, and that was also a DJU not playing anywhere near his best ball. Clemson has a better offense than they had. Clemson has a better defense, or a defense, I wouldn't say better, but very marginally less. Like it's not here to here. It's probably here to here. So they same level defense, better offense than they had, more with weapons, with Cade Klubnik, I still think is a better quarterback than DJU. There's a potential this to happen. It's written there. There's a very real potential of Clemson upsetting Georgia. And if that happens, it changes everything. I mean, it changes up so much. So we're excited to see that. That's just another reason to get excited about Clemson and this game. We are about 5 weeks away from kickoff. So exciting. Can't wait for that. But with all that being said, that is going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Clemson podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Later this week, we're going to continue this football conversation as we're getting ready for the preseason or the regular season. Next week, we got a week long full of guest appearances. We're gonna have some exciting guests joining us on the show for all that different stuff. But we also want to remind you, make sure if you are a fan, if you're an everyday listener of the Locked On Clemson podcast, join our insider program where you can have one-on-one chats, mailbag episodes, and film breakdown studies, all available to you. All you have to do is text Clemson to 864-252-1907. You get a 14-day free trial to try it out and see if it's for you. Make sure you join that insider program. We'd appreciate that. But hopefully you enjoyed the episode. We're so glad that you were here. Thanks for listening. Make sure you're subscribed to this podcast wherever you get your podcast at and over on YouTube. That way, every single day, this can be your first listen here on the Locked On Clemson podcast. Now, make sure you go check out other episodes from all of our Locked On podcast network, where it is your team every day. We can't wait to see you on tomorrow's episode. But until then, keep that Tiger pride alive and roaring. And as always, go Tigers.